Why do we fall in love with those who make us suffer the most? Why do some people seem to resent the very thing they chase: intimacy, connection, even love itself? Schopenhauer, the great pessimist of modern philosophy, believed that love is not about happiness. Not really. It's a trap, a mechanism of nature, a biological trick dressed up in poetry, perfume, and promises. And if you look around at the people burned by love, the games of modern dating, and the rising tension between the sexes, maybe he was right. This is not a story about how to find love. It's a philosophical autopsy of it. For Arthur Schopenhauer, love was nature's clever illusion, a force designed not to bring us joy, but to ensure the survival of the species. In his own words, the ultimate aim of all love affairs is really of a metaphysical nature. What is decided by it is not the weal or woe of individuals, but that of the human race. Harsh, maybe, but look at what love makes us do. We lie, perform, sacrifice, compete, obsess, and all for someone who may not even care. Schopenhauer believed that men and women are not equals in the domain of love. He saw women as embodiments of nature's cunning. Men, meanwhile, are victims of their own delusions, chasing idealized versions of love, all while being used by biology. But here's where it gets darker. He didn't hate women. He distrusted the system that both men and women are trapped in, because in the eyes of nature, we are not individuals, we are vessels, and love. It's the leash that keeps us moving toward reproduction, regardless of our happiness. One of Schopenhauer's most controversial ideas aligns, oddly enough, with a modern term, hypergamy, the idea that women tend to marry up, to seek the best genes, the highest status, the greatest chance of survival for their offspring. To Schopenhauer, this wasn't manipulative, it was natural selection in motion. But in today's world, this idea fuels resentment. Men feel discarded, women feel blamed, and both sides feel misunderstood. Because what we call love often hides something deeper: strategy. Modern dating reveals this tension. Apps filled with endless choices, people treated like profiles, and behind every swipe criteria we don't consciously admit. Is he tall enough? Is she attractive enough? Does he earn enough? Is she low maintenance? It's not just emotional, it's evolutionary. And when desire meets disappointment, what's left behind is resentment. Nietzsche once wrote about resentment, a deep, slow-burning resentment born from powerlessness. And today, it's everywhere. Men resent rejection and invisibility. Women resent being reduced to youth and beauty. But Schopenhauer would argue that both are victims, because they're not rejecting each other. They're rejecting the roles that nature has written for them. A man rejected may feel it's because he's not rich, tall, dominant. A woman overlooked may feel it's because she's aged, assertive, too independent. But these aren't personal failures, they're evolutionary scripts. The tragedy is that we confuse these scripts with moral judgments, and so love becomes a battlefield of egos, instead of a sanctuary for souls. People don't just want love anymore, they want validation, power, and revenge. We want to be wanted by the person who once rejected us. We want to win the game we didn't even know we were playing. Schopenhauer's writing on women was undeniably bitter, filled with harsh generalizations. But beneath the provocation, there's a theme worth unpacking. He saw women not as evil, but as more in tune with nature's cunning. He believed they understood, better than men, that the world isn't fair, it's strategic. While men romanticize, women survive. While men pursue ideals, women adapt to realities. And this is perhaps why so many men feel confused by modern women: independent, assertive, unapologetic. They are no longer playing the role of passive muse, they are choosing, deciding, controlling. And for men raised on the myth of romantic pursuit, this reversal feels like betrayal. But Schopenhauer would say it's not betrayal, it's evolution. Power has shifted, and love, if it ever was pure, has become negotiation. After all this, is there any hope left for love? Yes, but only if we stop lying to ourselves. Schopenhauer teaches us to strip away the illusion, not to become bitter, but to see clearly, to love with open eyes. To know that attraction is not purity, that desire often masks fear, and that people, men and women alike, carry wounds too deep for romance to heal. True love, if it exists, is born after illusion, after disillusionment, after resentment has burned itself out, and two people choose each other, not out of instinct, but out of truth. But most people never make it that far. They stay trapped in the cycle, chase, idealize, disappoint, resent, and perhaps that's the final cruelty of love. It promises salvation, but only offers us a mirror. Schopenhauer showed us the brutal side of desire, but in doing so he gave us something more valuable than comfort: clarity. Love may be nature's trick, but awareness, that's ours to claim. And maybe, just maybe, in seeing through the illusion, we can finally choose something deeper. Not just love, but understanding. But here's the cost of clarity: loneliness. When you begin to see love not as salvation, but as a strategy of nature, when you recognize that desire is often a response to lack, not abundance, something shifts. You stop chasing blindly. You start observing more than participating. And soon what once excited you begins to unsettle you. The seduction loses its spell. The games lose their thrill. The mask of romance slips, and underneath it we see something primal, even desperate. This is what makes Schopenhauer so dangerous. He pulls back the curtain, and once you've seen what's behind it, it's hard to fall back asleep. Love then becomes something else entirely. Not just connection, not even comfort, but a confrontation with the self, and all its illusions. Many men especially suffer silently from the weight of romantic idealism, conditioned to pursue, to prove their worth, to win affection through achievement. They internalize rejection as failure, and over time that failure turns inward, into shame. They are told to be providers, protectors, initiators, but no one tells them how to deal with invisibility. No one teaches them how to process the quiet humiliation of being overlooked. So instead, some become bitter, others become addicted to performance, and a few retreat entirely into digital worlds, ideologies, or stoic detachment. But beneath it all, there's still a child, longing not for conquest, but for recognition, not for domination, but for dignity. Schopenhauer didn't write much about that vulnerability, but it's there, between the lines of his cynicism. He saw what men become when they tie their value to something as unstable as approval. And he warned us, nature doesn't care about your feelings, it only cares about reproduction. And what about women? In modern culture, women have gained more autonomy than ever before. They're no longer confined to roles. They choose shape, define their lives. But with that power comes disillusionment. The fairy tales fade. The promises of romance often give way to emotional labor, betrayal, or indifference. Many women wake up to the reality that being desired is not the same as being valued. That beauty fades in a system obsessed with youth. That power is still gendered, even when disguised as progress. And so, like men, many women harden, not because they want to, but because they must. They become more selective, more guarded, not because they lack love, but because they've seen too much. Schopenhauer's mistake was in thinking women were cunning by nature, but perhaps it's not nature, it's adaptation. In a world that often punishes openness, survival demands strategy, and just like men, women carry a wound, the pain of being idealized but rarely understood. So what are we left with? A society where men and women don't trust each other, where love is filtered through suspicion, where connection becomes transaction, dating becomes performance, affection becomes leverage, and love becomes war by other means. We swipe, we text, we ghost, we avoid vulnerability while demanding intimacy. We chase connection while fearing commitment, and all the while, we call it freedom. But Schopenhauer might say, this is not freedom, this is nature's prison, made digital, efficient and emotionally exhausting. The real tragedy: most people aren't cruel, they're confused. They want to be seen, heard, loved, but they've been given no tools, no map, only algorithms, outdated scripts, and wounded examples. Maybe Schopenhauer wasn't entirely right. Maybe love isn't just a trick of nature. Maybe there's something sacred in our yearning, something more than biology. But we won't find it through illusion, and we won't heal through blame. Love can't be built on resentment, not between men and women, not between people and themselves. What we need is not more desire, not more strategy, but more depth, to see each other and ourselves, not as tools, roles or ideals, but as human, fallible, wounded, and still worthy. And perhaps that's where philosophy matters most, not in offering answers, but in breaking illusions, so that what remains is real. Once we strip away the illusions about love, about gender, about what we're owed, we're left with something fragile, but also something true. We begin to see that under all the layers, the bitterness, the games, the withdrawal, is a deeper hunger for honesty, for recognition, for something real. And here's the paradox: the only way to reach that realness is through vulnerability, the very thing we've all been taught to fear. It's easy to armor up, to intellectualize, to analyze people like chess pieces on a board of mating strategies, but none of that leads to intimacy. None of it heals what's broken. So maybe the answer isn't in fighting nature or surrendering to it. Maybe it's in transcending it, by making conscious what was once blind instinct, by taking what nature began and finishing it with meaning. Not just mating, but merging. Not just desire, but devotion. Not the intoxication of romance, but the discipline of love. A love that's not about conquering the other, but confronting the self. So where does that leave us? Perhaps love is foolish. Perhaps it is irrational, painful, and often disappointing. But maybe that's what makes it beautiful, because love at its core is an act of defiance, against fear, against ego, against the cold mechanics of evolution. Schopenhauer looked at the world and saw suffering. He wasn't wrong, but there's another lens, one that says yes, we suffer, yes, we deceive, yes, we fall short, and still, we try. We reach for one another in the dark. We build stories, families, meaning. We risk everything for connection, not because we're blind, but because we hope, in spite of everything. Hope not in a perfect partner, but in shared growth, in mutual becoming. Love then is not the escape from suffering. It's the choice to suffer with someone, and in that shared fire, to be transformed. That's not nature's trick. That's human transcendence. In the end, Schopenhauer wasn't just a pessimist. He was a mirror. He forced us to look at the parts of ourselves we'd rather deny. The pettiness, the jealousy, the manipulation, the fear. In Jungian terms, Schopenhauer showed us our shadow, the unconscious drives behind our so-called noblest acts. And maybe that's his greatest gift. Not comfort, but confrontation. He dared to say what others wouldn't. That much of what we call love is just camouflage for selfishness. That under virtue often lies instinct, and under instinct, terror. But here's the thing about seeing the shadow. Once you name it, you're no longer enslaved by it. You can make different choices. You can choose integrity over impulse, clarity over codependence, presence over possession. That's where Schopenhauer's darkness becomes the soil for growth. Because when you confront the void, you stop asking others to fill it. You learn to stand alone, not in bitterness, but in peace. And only then are you truly free to love. So maybe love was never meant to complete us. Maybe it was meant to reveal us, to show us where we're still broken, where we still hide, where we still fear being seen. And in that revelation, to offer us a choice, not between fantasy and despair, but between illusion and awakening. Because the real question isn't, does love exist? It's, can you love with your eyes open? Not despite the truth, but because of it. That is the only kind of love worth having. We often talk about men and women as if they're just negotiating roles in a marketplace. But beneath that surface lies something deeper, something archetypal. Carl Jung spoke of the anima and animus, the feminine within the male psyche, and the masculine within the female. He believed that true wholeness isn't found in another person,
but in integrating these inner opposites within ourselves. When a man has not integrated his anima, he idealizes women, or resents them. When a woman hasn't integrated her animus, she may project her power struggles onto men, either seeking domination, or fearing it. What we often interpret as toxic masculinity, or hypergamy, or female manipulation, might just be the outward dance of inner fragmentation. We're looking for the lost half of ourselves in someone else, but the unconscious doesn't want a partner, it wants a mirror. And that's why our relationships are so often war zones. We are not just dating people, we're confronting gods and monsters we've never made peace with. There's an ancient myth that runs through nearly every culture, the myth that we were once whole, and love will return us to that wholeness. Plato's Symposium describes humans as once being double, both male and female fused together. Zeus, threatened by their power, split them in two, and so we spend our lives searching for our other half. It's a beautiful story, but it might be our most dangerous delusion, because as long as you believe someone else will complete you, you'll never confront the abyss within. You'll chase, beg, seduce and punish, not out of love, but out of avoidance. Avoidance of your own loneliness, your own chaos, your own unlived life. Schopenhauer's genius, and perhaps his tragedy, was that he did confront the abyss, and he found it empty. But what if the abyss isn't the end? What if it's the beginning? Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." If Schopenhauer stripped away the illusions, Nietzsche asked, "Now that the illusions are gone, what will you build in their place?" This is the challenge of modern love, not to retreat into bitterness, not to fall into biological fatalism, but to ask, can we love, knowing the truth? Can we embrace desire, knowing it's not pure? Can we give, knowing it might not be returned? Can we commit, not because we're complete, but because we're committed to becoming? Love in this light is not a fairy tale, it's a spiritual practice. It's not about finding the one, it's about becoming someone capable of seeing others clearly, and choosing them anyway, not out of lack, but out of abundance. Schopenhauer was right, love is full of pain, illusions and primal urges, but he missed something too, the possibility of transformation, that we are not bound forever by instinct, that through self-awareness, suffering, and will, we can forge meaning, even from our darkest drives. And maybe that's what makes us truly human. Not that we escape nature, but that we redeem it. Not that we erase suffering, but that we grow through it. And in that growth, we find something Schopenhauer never quite grasped. That love, when stripped of illusion, might not be less beautiful. It might be the only thing that's real. Most people don't fear loneliness because they dislike being alone. They fear it because in silence their illusions die. When you're not distracted by texting, swiping, or planning your next romantic conquest, you're left alone with the question Schopenhauer couldn't ignore: who am I, when no one desires me? And that's the secret terror behind much of modern dating. It's not just rejection we're afraid of, it's irrelevance. A man ignored by women is made to feel useless. A woman overlooked by men is made to feel invisible. And in both cases, our worth seems to vanish the moment we're no longer desired. But what if solitude isn't a punishment? What if it's a rite of passage, a sacred silence that allows the deeper self to speak? In a world obsessed with dominance, status, and strategic seduction, it's easy to forget that most power games are cries for love. He negs her to feel superior. She withholds affection to feel in control. They both post pictures not to express joy, but to provoke envy. What are we doing? We're using others to fill a void we don't know how to name. Schopenhauer saw through all of it. He stripped love of its sentimentality, and what he found was survival, clothed in poetry. But survival isn't enough, not for a conscious being. We don't just want to mate, we want to be seen. We don't just want sex, we want transcendence. And yet, until we stop treating connection like a transaction, we will never experience the presence that true intimacy requires. So what happens after disillusionment? After you've seen through the games, the hormones, the projections, after you've accepted that no one will complete you? That's where real love begins, a kind of love that isn't based on need but on clarity, where two people don't consume each other, but stand beside each other, fully awake. This love doesn't guarantee butterflies, it doesn't promise eternal passion, but it does offer something else: peace. The peace of being chosen by someone who knows your flaws and stays. The peace of not performing, not competing, just being. The peace of walking together, not out of fantasy, but out of mutual evolution. This is love after awakening. Not perfect, not idealized, but profoundly human. Schopenhauer may have told us that desire leads only to suffering, and in a way he was right. But suffering, as the Buddha said, is not the end, it's the beginning of wisdom. Because once you've suffered enough from chasing illusions, you begin to ask better questions. You begin to notice things that algorithms can't optimize for. A moment of silence that feels full. A glance that says more than 1,000 words. A kind word that expects nothing in return. You begin to value depth over drama, substance over spectacle, being over becoming, and slowly something shifts. Not in the world but in you. Love now isn't something you find, it's something you bring. In the end, Schopenhauer gave us a gift, even if he didn't intend to. He tore down the illusions of romanticism, so that something more honest could rise from the ruins. He reminded us that love is not divine, it is not pure, it is not eternal, but it is ours. Ours to shape, to suffer through, and to grow with. Philosophy doesn't give us tidy answers, but it gives us something better. The courage to see clearly, and still choose to care. And maybe that's the final act of rebellion. To love not because it's perfect, but because we are finally ready.